Welcome. What you are about to watch is not science fiction, and it is not folklore. It is a serious investigation into one of history's most compelling unresolved questions, the mystery of the Priory of Sion Hoax, how a French con man created the world's most successful fake secret society. Across the world, in universities, research institutes, and field excavations, serious scholars are wrestling with evidence that does not fit the accepted story. Evidence that has been documented, measured, and peer-reviewed, and that still has no satisfying conventional explanation. We are going to look at that evidence carefully, without prejudice in either direction. Not dismissing what is extraordinary, but not accepting it without scrutiny either. The truth, as always, is in the details. In 1982, 3 British journalists published a book called The Holy Blood and the Holy Grail that proposed one of the most sensational theories in the history of religion: that Jesus Christ had not died on the cross, but had survived, married Mary Magdalene, fathered children, and that the bloodline of Jesus and Mary had continued in secret through the Merovingian dynasty of France, where it was protected by a clandestine organization called the Priory of Sion, a secret society whose members had included Leonardo da Vinci, Isaac Newton, and Victor Hugo. The book was an international bestseller. It spawned dozens of follow-up books, inspired Dan Brown's The Da Vinci Code, which sold over 80 million copies, and introduced millions of people to the idea that the history of Western Christianity was a cover-up maintained by a conspiracy of centuries. And it was entirely based on a deliberate, documented fraud manufactured by a French con man who admitted it before he died. The Priory of Sion was registered as a real organization in France in 1956 by a man named Pierre Plantard, a notorious far-right political agitator and fantasist who had been imprisoned in 1953 for fraud. Plantard registered the Priory of Sion as a small social club in Annemasse with vaguely spiritual objectives. It had nothing to do with Jesus, bloodlines, or secret history. Over the following decade, working with an associate named Gérard de Cide and a self-described surrealist artist named Philippe de Chérici, Plantard fabricated an elaborate fake history for the organization. The centerpiece of this fabrication was a set of documents called the Dossiers Secrets de Henri Larbonneau, allegedly historical documents proving the existence of a medieval Priory of Sion with a grand pedigree. Plantard and de Chérici planted these forged documents in the Bibliothèque Nationale de France in Paris, where they could be discovered by researchers. The discovery of these documents by British journalists Michael Bagent, Richard Lee, and Henry Lincoln, and their transformation into the Holy Blood and the Holy Grail, was the intended outcome of Plantard's operation. Plantard wanted to establish himself as the last of the Merovingian bloodline, the rightful king of France, using the elaborate backstory he had constructed. He never achieved this political goal, but the legend he created acquired a life of its own far beyond his intentions or control. The fake secret society became real in the minds of millions of readers, and the truth about its origin, which was publicly established in French courts in the 1990s, has had essentially no impact on the legend's popularity. This is where our investigation begins. Stay with us, because the further we go into the evidence, the more extraordinary it becomes. The story you think you know is only the surface. Beneath it lies something far more remarkable. Let us begin. Before we go further, if you are finding this investigation compelling, please take a moment right now to like this video, drop a comment below with your thoughts, and share it with someone who loves a good historical mystery. If you are watching on YouTube, hit subscribe and tap the bell icon so you never miss a new episode. If you found us through Facebook, tap follow on our page. It takes just a few seconds, and it genuinely helps us keep making these documentaries. Now, let us get back to the investigation. Before we examine the specific evidence, we need to step back and understand the context. This case does not exist in isolation. It sits within the landscape of modern documented mysteries, and to properly evaluate what we are looking at, we need to understand the broader picture that surrounds it. The 20th and 21st centuries were supposed to be the age of answers. Science had decoded DNA, split the atom, put humans on the moon, and mapped the genome. By the logic of accelerating discovery, every mystery should be converging toward explanation. And yet the ledger of genuinely unexplained phenomena, events witnessed by credible observers, investigated by serious researchers, and still lacking a satisfying account, has not shrunk. If anything, it has grown. Part of this is a failure of classification. Phenomena that do not fit established categories tend to be dismissed rather than investigated, filed under anecdotal or mass hysteria, and removed from serious consideration. This is not always wrong. Genuine hoaxes and misperceptions account for a large portion of anomalous reports. But the dismissal is sometimes premature, and the cost is real. Cases that might have yielded genuine insight are closed before they are fully examined. Witnesses are discredited. Evidence is lost. The question is never properly asked. The cases that endure, that survive rigorous scrutiny, and still refuse to yield to conventional explanation, are a small but significant set. They share certain characteristics: multiple independent witnesses, physical evidence consistent with witness testimony, and a complete absence of any plausible prosaic explanation that accounts for all the data. These are not ghost stories. They are open problems in empirical science, waiting for someone with the right tools and the intellectual courage to take them seriously. This context matters because it tells us something important. What we are about to investigate is not an isolated curiosity. It is part of a pattern that researchers in multiple fields have been independently documenting for decades. And patterns in science demand explanation. With that foundation in place, let us now turn to the specific case at hand. Now we reach the heart of the matter. The core evidence surrounding the Priory of Sion hoax, how a French con man created the world's most successful fake secret society, is more extensive, more verified, and more troubling for conventional explanations than most people realize. Let us walk through it systematically, fact by fact, and allow the evidence to speak for itself. We are not going to speculate here. Every point that follows is documented in peer-reviewed publications, official archaeological records, or government archives that are publicly accessible. The question is not whether these facts are real. The question is what they mean. Consider this first extraordinary detail. Pierre Plantard, 1920-2000, was the creator of the modern Priory of Sion mythology. His prior to the Priory fabrication included founding an organization called Alpha Galates in 1941 during the Nazi occupation of France, which published a magazine with anti-Semitic content, being convicted of fraud and breach of trust in 1953 and imprisoned for 6 months, and various failed attempts to establish himself as a figure of political significance in post-war France. The Priory of Sion that Plantard registered in 1956 was a legitimate but trivial organization. Its statutes described it as a social club for members of a subsidized housing association in Annemasse. This single data point, if taken in isolation, might be set aside. Anomalies happen, instruments malfunction, researchers make mistakes. But as we continue, you will see that this is not an isolated anomaly. It is part of a consistent and documented pattern. But that is only the beginning. Researchers also discovered the dossier's secrets. The forged documents at the heart of the Priory mythology were deposited in the Bibliothèque Nationale de France under the name Henri Laboneau, a pseudonym for an associate of Plantard, between approximately 1964 and 1967. The documents purported to be historical records establishing the Priory of Sion's existence since 1099 and its guardianship of the true Merovingian bloodline. The documents included a list of Grand Masters of the Priory, allegedly Leonardo da Vinci, Robert Boyle, Isaac Newton, Victor Hugo, Claude Debussy, and Jean Cocteau, all chosen for their fame and association with arcane or artistic traditions. The list was entirely fabricated. Now, a skeptic might propose an alternative explanation for this, and that is entirely reasonable. We should always test alternative explanations before accepting extraordinary ones. The problem is that the alternative explanations, when examined carefully, create more problems than they solve. The mystery deepens when we examine. The forger of the dossier's secrets was Philippe de Chérisy, 1923–1985, an actor and acquaintance of Plantard who later admitted in a memoir, not published until 2016, that he had created the key documents. De Chérisy was the author of a manuscript called Circuit, in which he explicitly stated he had fabricated the documents and explained the encoding techniques used to create the false historical appearance. French journalist Jean-Luc Chourmel documented de Chérisy's confession in the 1980s, but this information had limited impact on the legend's momentum because the Holy Blood and the Holy Grail had already been published. This is where the conventional account begins to strain. Each individual fact might be dismissed or minimized in isolation, but the cumulative weight of the evidence is another matter entirely. Perhaps most remarkable of all, the French court investigation of 1993, triggered by investigative journalist Jean-Luc Chourmel's documentation of the fraud, found Plantard's home and seized files showing that he had fabricated documents and that the Priory of Sion's historical claims were invented. Under questioning by the investigating magistrate, Plantard admitted that the Priory's Grand Master's list was invented and that many of the supporting documents had been fabricated. He was instructed by the court to cease his activities and apparently complied. Plantard's public activities in connection with the Priory ceased after 1993. Researchers who have examined this evidence have described it as genuinely difficult to explain within the accepted framework. These are not fringe commentators. They are credentialed academics publishing in mainstream journals, raising questions that the field has not yet satisfactorily answered. Then there is the matter of the Holy Blood and the Holy Grail authors, Michael Bagent, Richard Lee, and Henry Lincoln, did not knowingly participate in the fraud. They were its intended audience and targets, and they conducted what they believed was genuine historical research. However, their research methodology has been criticized for relying uncritically on the planted documents and for accepting assertions from Plantard and his associates that should have been independently verified. When the forgery was exposed, the authors declined to retract their conclusions, arguing that the underlying thesis, Jesus's bloodline, the Merovingian connection, might still be true even if the specific documents supporting it were forged. What makes this particularly significant is its independence from the previous points. This is not a case of one theory requiring another. These are separate lines of evidence converging on the same uncomfortable conclusion. Adding to the enigma is this finding. Dan Brown's The Da Vinci Code, 2003, drew extensively on the Holy Blood and the Holy Grail and explicitly referenced it in the novel's text. The book sold over 80 million copies worldwide and was adapted into a major film, 2006. The three British authors sued Brown's publisher for copyright infringement in 2006, arguing that the Da Vinci Code plagiarized the central theme of their work. The suit was dismissed. The judge found that historical facts and theories cannot be protected by copyright. The litigation was notable for the paradox of the Holy Blood authors being forced to argue in court that their theories were fictional historical facts rather than original creative work. Taken together, these facts form a pattern that cannot be explained by coincidence, misidentification, or methodological error. Each piece of evidence has been examined by skeptics. Each has been subjected to alternative explanations. And in each case, the alternative explanation falls short of accounting for everything that has been documented. We are left with a body of evidence that demands explanation and an accepted narrative that does not provide one. This is where serious inquiry begins. Now that we have established the evidence, we need to examine the theories that researchers have proposed to explain the Priory of Sion hoax. How a French con man created the world's most successful fake secret society. This is where the debate becomes most intense, because the theories reflect not just different interpretations of the same evidence, but fundamentally different assumptions about what is possible and what the past looked like. Understanding these theories is not just an academic exercise. Each one has been championed by serious researchers with genuine credentials, and each one captures something that the others miss. The truth, if it is ever established, will likely draw on elements of several. The first major explanation proposed by researchers holds that the deliberate propaganda theory, the historically accurate explanation, holds that the Priory of Sion was created, and the associated mythology fabricated for Plantard's specific personal and political goals. Specifically, to establish his claim to be the last of the Merovingian bloodline and the rightful king of France. The elaborate construction of fake historical documents, the strategic placement of those documents where credulous researchers would find them, and the cultivation of British journalists who would amplify the story internationally were all deliberate acts in service of this political ambition. The theory that the Da Vinci Code revealed suppressed truths was itself a product of the original con. This interpretation has significant academic support and is backed by substantial evidence. But it is not without problems. Critics point out that it requires assumptions that go beyond what the evidence strictly supports, and that key predictions of this theory have not been confirmed by subsequent research. It remains contested, and the contest is productive. A rival school of thought argues that the credulous researcher theory, somewhat cynically, attributes the persistence of the Priory of Sion myth partly to the motivated reasoning of its later popularizers. Bagent, Lee, and Lincoln had invested enormous effort and professional reputation in the Holy Blood and the Holy Grail, and the admission that its documentary foundation was forged would have required a public retraction they were unwilling to make. Dan Brown, writing fiction explicitly, was not intellectually or professionally responsible for the historical accuracy of his sources. The result was a mythology with a self-sustaining infrastructure of writers, readers, and tourist sites, Rensselaerschau, that generated ongoing economic incentives to maintain the story. This theory is controversial, and deliberately so. Its proponents argue that the evidence demands an explanation outside the conventional framework. Critics counter that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and that the evidence presented, while suggestive, does not yet meet that standard. The debate continues in peer-reviewed literature. Perhaps the most unconventional theory suggests that the archetype appeal theory proposes that the Priory of Sion myth became so popular not because people were deceived, but because it satisfied deep psychological needs: the desire for a hidden truth behind official history, the romantic appeal of a sacred bloodline, and a suppressed feminine, divine Mary Magdalene, and the structure of a revelation narrative in which special knowledge is available to the initiated. Under this model, the question of whether the priory was real or fake is less important than understanding why millions of people found it appealing regardless of its evidential status. The myth tells us something about the psychological needs that institutional religion and secular history fail to satisfy. What is striking about this debate is not merely that experts disagree. That is normal and healthy in science. What is striking is the quality of the disagreement. Serious researchers, working from the same body of evidence, reaching genuinely different conclusions. That level of fundamental disagreement, when it persists over decades, is a signal that something important has not yet been understood. The question is not which of these theories is right. The question is whether any of them is right, or whether the truth is something that none of the current frameworks has yet been able to capture. The case surrounding the Priory of Sion Hoax, how a French con man created the world's most successful fake secret society, does not rest on speculation alone. What distinguishes this investigation from pure mythology is the existence of documented, physical, verifiable evidence, material that has been examined by credentialed researchers and whose authenticity is not seriously disputed. What is disputed is its interpretation. let us review the most significant documented evidence as objectively as possible. We are not going to cherry-pick the data that supports a preferred conclusion. We are going to lay out what exists and let you draw your own assessment. Physical evidence supporting this account includes the French court records from the 1993 investigation, including Plantard's own admissions under questioning, constitute the definitive legal evidence that the Priory of Sion mythology was fabricated. The confiscated files from Plantard's home, which included correspondence documenting the fabrication project and lists of forged documents, provide physical evidence of the fraud. These records are in the French National Archives and have been examined by researchers including Chaumail and in English by Sharon Newman, whose 2005 book, The Real History Behind the Da Vinci Code, documents the fraud in detail. This evidence has been subjected to independent verification. Skeptics have examined it. Alternative explanations have been proposed and tested. The data remains. The question of what it means remains open. Investigators have documented Philippe de Chérizy's manuscript circuit, written in the 1960s and not published until 2016, contains his explicit admission that he created the key dossier's secrets documents and describes the encoding techniques he used to create false appearances of historical authenticity. The manuscript was known to Chaumail before his death and was cited in French journalism about the fraud, but its late publication date means it was not available to English-language debunkers until recently. Its content is consistent with and confirms the other documentary evidence for the fabrication. This evidence has been subjected to independent verification. Skeptics have examined it. Alternative explanations have been proposed and tested. The data remains. The question of what it means remains open. On-site analysis revealed bibliographic analysis of the dossier's secrets by French researchers, including analysis of the paper and printing technology used in the documents, confirmed that they could not be genuine medieval or early modern documents and were created using 20th century materials and techniques. The specific anachronisms in the documents, references to organizations and events that post-date their claimed composition date, further confirm their fabricated nature. This physical evidence, combined with the testimony of the fabricators themselves, has been accepted by all serious historians as definitively establishing the hoax. This evidence has been subjected to independent verification. Skeptics have examined it. Alternative explanations have been proposed and tested. The data remains. The question of what it means remains open. Each individual piece of evidence might, in principle, be explained away. A single anomalous artifact might be misidentified. A single anomalous date might reflect contamination. A single anomalous eyewitness account might reflect misperception. The question is whether all of the evidence can be explained away, and whether the explanations required are more or less plausible than the evidence itself. When multiple independent lines of inquiry converge on the same conclusion, that convergence is the most powerful signal in empirical science. And that is exactly what we are seeing here. We have examined the history, the evidence, and the theories surrounding the Priory of Sion hoax, how a French con man created the world's most successful fake secret society. Now, we need to ask the question that is sometimes overlooked in discussions of ancient mysteries. Why does this matter? What does it mean for us today? It would be easy to file this away as an interesting historical curiosity, a puzzle from a distant past with no bearing on our present lives. That would be a fundamental mistake. The questions raised by this case touch on issues that are directly relevant to who we are, where we came from, and what the human story actually looks like before the period covered by conventional history. The Priory of Sion hoax remains one of the most studied examples of a successful disinformation operation, one in which deliberately planted false information acquired mass credibility and a self-sustaining popular following that persisted long after the fraud was publicly exposed. Researchers in media literacy religious studies, and the psychology of belief have used the case to study how conspiracy theories develop, spread, and resist debunking. The case illustrates that the exposure of a hoax as a hoax has limited power to end the hoax's influence once it has been sufficiently widely adopted. The village of Rennes-le-Château in the Languedoc, which Plantard connected to the Priory mythology through the story of priest Bérenger Saunière, has been economically transformed by the tourism generated by the Da Vinci Code and the broader Priory mythology. Hundreds of thousands of visitors annually visit the village, which has a population of approximately 100 people, to see the church Saunière renovated. The local economy depends substantially on tourists seeking physical evidence of a conspiracy that has been publicly debunked. The persistence of Rennes-le-Château tourism is a case study in the economics of mystery and the limits of factual correction. Furthermore, the tools available to investigate these questions are advancing rapidly. Satellite imaging, ground-penetrating radar, ancient DNA analysis, isotopic tracing, and deep-sea sonar are all providing capabilities that previous generations of researchers could only dream of. Cases that were genuinely unresolvable 10 years ago are now open to new analysis, and the findings, consistently, are expanding rather than contracting the mystery. The investigation continues. New discoveries are being made. New analyses are being published. New voices are entering the conversation from disciplines that were not previously part of the discussion. The answers, when they come, and they will come, will not merely solve a historical puzzle. They will force a fundamental revision of assumptions that underpin our entire understanding of human history and human potential. We have now walked through the complete case of the Priory of Sion Hoax, how a French con man created the world's most successful fake secret society, from the historical record through the physical evidence, across the competing theories, and into the modern significance of what remains unresolved. What the story of Priory of Sion ultimately reveals is not just a historical puzzle. It is a mirror. It reflects our assumptions back at us, our assumptions about what ancient people were capable of, about how knowledge is gained and lost across the centuries, and about the relationship between what we know and what we merely think we know. The evidence presented in this documentary is real. The questions it raises are genuine. The debate among researchers is ongoing, and that is healthy. Science is not a set of conclusions. It is a process, and the process requires that we remain open to evidence that challenges what we thought we knew, however uncomfortable that challenge might be. If you came to this documentary as a skeptic, we hope the evidence gave you something to think about. If you came as a true believer, we hope the critical examination gave you a more nuanced picture. The truth, as always, lies in the evidence, not in what we want to be true. Thank you for watching. If this investigation sparked your curiosity, please help us reach more people. If you are watching on YouTube, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new documentary. If you are watching on Facebook, tap the follow button on our page to stay connected. We publish new documentaries every week, covering the full range of historical mysteries that the mainstream has not yet adequately explained. Leave a comment telling us which case you want us to investigate next. The conversation continues. The investigation never ends.